Hi, I'm Lo, and welcome to How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Blockchain. First and foremost, I'd like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, upon whose lands I'm using to record this video. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and note that sovereignty was never ceded. I'd also like to thank IGEA and its partners, both government and private, as well as its volunteers and staff for facilitating GCAP 2021 and inviting me to speak at these talks. I've rewritten, re-recorded, and re-edited this talk several times now, but even after submitting a final version of this talk to Sav, I realized that I had to start afresh. So sorry Sav and the GCAP team for this update, but I hope that you'll understand. This video aims to provide some helpful information for anyone that's curious about the intersection of games and blockchains, and an interesting way to engage with this technology, whilst also attempting to address some of the varied concerns that people may hold around this sector. However, it cannot fully address every point of concern that exists at this current time. As such, I've tried to create this talk as a launching off point for anyone listening to allow them to research further and go on their own journey of discovery. I've come to the belief that blockchain technology may create as much of a substantial change to our lives as the internet has, and one which has the potential for enormous repercussions, not just for our industry and the way that we make games, but also for international financial and investment sectors, social media platforms, software as a service businesses, and to a lesser extent, governments both local and at the national level, partially due to taxation implications and partially due to an increased interconnectedness of international financial markets. Frankly, I find some of the potential repercussions of blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies to be deeply unsettling. But I also believe that this technology could be a catalyst for big changes within our industry and the internet more generally. As such, I believe it's in all of our best interests as individuals and as an industry group to understand the changes that may be facilitated by blockchain technology and identify beneficial use cases, as well as advocating for regulated utilization or informed rejection of blockchain technologies. Within this talk, I want to speak in a manner that is as transparent as possible, to discuss, to the best of my abilities, some of the controversies and ideologies that exist within this space, including philosophy and politics, and only touch on some of the transformative use cases that I've identified. In brief, I'd like to summarize my thesis as follows. I currently believe that the energy consumption argument against blockchain technology generally is perhaps misguided. And although it is directly applicable to Bitcoin and a select group of other cryptocurrencies, these concerns are not widely applicable to blockchain technology generally. Further, the specific focus on energy consumption has allowed for larger ideological conversations about this technology to continue without a wide range of viewpoints. And I believe that diversity of thought is critical when applied to a technology that positions itself as a public utility. Additionally, it's my humble opinion that there are some substantial misunderstandings around NFTs, and I believe that NFT technology has a practical and stimulating use case for many industries, including games. Although there are reasonable arguments that the current NFT marketplace is rife with Ponzi schemes and perhaps money laundering, NFT speculation and trading distracts from larger and more important conversations around digital assets more generally. Lastly, I believe that smart contract-powered decentralized applications and games may provide us a blueprint to not only move beyond advertising-driven attention and user data monetization, but also facilitate community-developed and owned GPL3 or similarly licensed open-source platforms to reach commercial viability and change the way that we view social media platforms and content distribution platforms from something that's a corporate-owned business to something that we treat more as a digital public utility. So who am I? My name's Lo Maslin. I'm a graduate of the Griffith University Bachelor of Games Design program of 2012, and I consider myself primarily to be a designer with a keen interest in product management. I've worked at two studios, Sponge Games in Brisbane and Mountains here in Melbourne, and I've also lectured at the Griffith University Film School in Brisbane in the area of games, and I've occasionally presented lectures at the University of Queensland on transgender representation in screen media. I also wrote an exegesis as part of my honours program on environmental design for first-person, narrative-driven experiences. Outside of games, I've also had many special interests over the years, including frontside bus overclocking on NVIDIA chipsets for Intel Core 2 Duo and Core 2 Quad processors, as well as Bosch L-Jectronic and D-Jectronic fuel injection systems for Japanese sports cars, and a wider interest in how EFI frameworks, or electronic fuel injection frameworks, facilitate the operation of internal combustion engines. Finally, one of my other biggest interests has been the history, culture, and commodification of skateboarding. Within games, I've been fascinated by several areas of our industry and how they've evolved over time. This includes the PC gaming space and its growth from shareware products to digital distribution, and the impact of online piracy and DRM software on this path, the evolution of web games from Shockwave to Flash to browser-run MMOs, and now browser-based Metaverse experiences, and the evolution of monetization strategies within our industry, and the maturation and growth of free-to-play design philosophies beyond mobile, as well as the growing importance of a strong player community in the success of a games project. If you've entered this talk with strongly held views on blockchains and cryptocurrencies, I totally understand. But I invite you to participate in some of the larger conversations that are taking place, because I truly believe that a diversity of thought in this area is really important. So to begin our journey of understanding of blockchains, NFTs, and why I'm quite interested in this space, unfortunately, I think that the best place for us to start is with a rather thorough discussion of Bitcoin, what it does, what it offers, and how it works, as well as some of the philosophies that underpin this technology. So let's begin. So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency that was initially outlined in a white paper published in 2008 by an anonymous creator using the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi was initially very active within cypherpunk forums and established Bitcoin as per the original white paper, but disappeared in 2012 and has essentially left Bitcoin as a leaderless project. The identity of Bitcoin's creator is widely debated. Several individuals have made claims that they are Satoshi over past decades, although it is widely believed that the likely identity of Satoshi was Hal Finney, a computer scientist who passed away in 2014 as a result of ALS. Initially, the circulating narrative around Bitcoin was that the project represented digital money or transactional technology. However, over time, this narrative has shifted towards digital gold or an investment/store of value. As digital money or digital gold, Bitcoin aims to provide a method for users to send funds to one another in an unregulated peer-to-peer manner, without the need for external organizations to audit, approve, or settle transactions. In this way, it arguably reduces the need for banks and payment processors to be involved in e-commerce, theoretically reducing fees, and also allowing for a wider range of businesses to operate online. As a global network, it also allows for smoother transfers of funds internationally, rather than using the current wire transfer infrastructure, which may involve lengthy processing times due to banks not utilizing standard payment infrastructure and management systems across borders. In some regions where remittance payments, that is, payments from a citizen living outside of their country back to their family at home, Bitcoin may also provide an alternative to high-fee services like Western Union. Additionally, Bitcoin doesn't require a bank account, which can sometimes be hard to obtain within some countries, and all it requires is access to a computer and an internet connection or a smartphone to transact. This alone has been a large driver of Bitcoin's utilization and adoption within some developing nations. I believe that we can all agree, however, that there are some intrinsic disadvantages to this digital money or digital gold paradigm that are really obvious though. There's a lack of anti-money laundering or AML infrastructure by design. There's also a lack of taxation frameworks for goods purchased within many regions using cryptocurrencies, and a lack of protection against fraud for users of these networks. There's also an argument that investing within Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies is akin to participating within a Ponzi scheme. Personally, I believe that there are some cryptocurrencies and blockchain projects that have an intrinsic value as represented by their network or the software applications that they support. But this is very much a personal judgment, and I'm not here to dissuade anyone that believes that an appropriate value for a token or coin or protocol is naught. Finally, the largest issue that I think most people are aware of is the environmental impacts of Bitcoin and some cryptocurrencies. To explain these issues further, I think the best way for us to do it is to dive into how Bitcoin works at a protocol level and discuss the mechanisms that actually cause this energy consumption. So Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency that utilizes a database in the form of a blockchain to record all historical transactions that have occurred within the network. The use of a blockchain ensures that all Bitcoin that have ever been created are accounted for in an immutable, unalterable database with a public history, and subsequently that all users of the network are unable to spend more Bitcoin than they're recorded as owning, but also that they're unable to create new Bitcoin out of thin air. The Bitcoin blockchain is stored in a decentralized manner through the assistance of node operators, whom each hold a full copy of Bitcoin's history in the form of a ledger. The storage of Bitcoin's blockchain database across multiple nodes means that should a bad actor want to reverse transactions or make some sort of substantial change to the network, they'd have to compromise multiple nodes rather than a centralized system, thus improving the security and resilience of the network as a whole. In addition to holding a history of transactions on the network, these nodes are also able to receive transaction requests, which are broadcast on the Bitcoin network by end users. These requests are then stored on a node in what's called the mempool or memory pool until such time as they are accepted or discarded. The validating or discarding of pending transaction requests is managed by a second group of network operators. These are called miners. And this is where we get into what is absolutely Bitcoin's most controversial feature, its proof-of-work consensus mechanism, or in other words, the technical method that it uses to align the views and records of multiple network operators across its decentralized system. So each miner is able to monitor the mempool and select a number of these pending transactions, verify their validity, and sequence these transactions into a cohesive history. This pending history can then potentially become a new block in the history of the blockchain. For an individual miner's sequence of events or their version of history to be confirmed as the version of history, and for their block to be confirmed as a new block within the blockchain itself, this miner must utilize their own computational resources to cryptographically sign their proposed block's header data using a double-hashed SHA-256 function and a nonce value that they elect to test. The process of testing a nonce value in this cryptographic signing process is called hashing, and the resulting hash or signature on the block header may be a number between the value of 0 and the highest potential value of a 256-bit number. The nonce can be thought of as a single variable that can deterministically, but in a random order, alter the length of this hash number. The Bitcoin network then provides a target length for an acceptable hash at that moment in time, and the first miner that provides a block that is signed with a hash value of less than that target length, in other words, a certain amount of digits long, is proposed by that miner as valid. That proposal is then looked at by other nodes and miners that are on the network. It's checked over to make sure that its transaction history aligns with transactions that are in a node's mempool. And should it then be accepted as a real verified block, it will be broadcast as a true block to other node operators and miners and relayed throughout the network. So to summarize this little bit and break it down into practice, miners use their computer to guess this magic number, this nonce, over and over and over again until they hopefully generate a cryptographically signed block that meets the criteria of the network. And in that last step, should a miner submit an invalid block where it's found that the transaction history has been messed with or doesn't align with the mempool, they will have wasted electrical energy in the process of producing that block. And fundamentally, that's the mechanism to punish misbehavior of miners. It's a waste of their electricity. In other words, it's a real world expenditure that they have to accept. So what's the incentive for a miner to operate? Well, should a miner have their data added to the chain, the miner is provided with an award. At the current time, the block reward for Bitcoin is 6.25 BC, or over 400,000 Australian dollars. Each 10 minutes, a new block is added to the network, which means that every 10 minutes, a miner or a group of miners working in unison as a pool will be awarded this amount of Bitcoin. This is the only way that new Bitcoin are added to the network. And it's also worth noting that this target value for a hash isn't static, but can be dynamically impacted by the amount of miners or participants on the network. The greater the amount of miners, the shorter the target length for a hash, or in other words, the more difficult that block is to mine. The style of creating and adding new blocks to a blockchain is called proof-of-work consensus. Some proponents of this style of consensus argue that proof-of-work is necessary for digital gold or digital money projects to gain value immaculately, based on the electricity cost of producing producing coins, they can accrue value directly. In other words, the laws of thermodynamics are used to create an underlying valuation for a digital asset. It's also argued that proof-of-work consensus provides security to a network, as bad actors are required to spend huge amounts of electrical energy in order to submit faulty blocks to the network or attack the history of a network. Additionally, due to the random nature of the hashing process, no miner is likely to guess a correct nonce consecutively and attain a lasting hold over the future of the network. However, this style of consensus also has a number of downsides. The first, which is a factor that most people are aware of, is the energy consumption of the network, which is utterly astronomical. In the early days of the network, when there weren't a lot of miners, the dynamic difficulty meant that every 10 minutes or so a new block would still be created, but the creation difficulty was much easier. In other words, effectively the amount of electricity the network used was much lower. However, as the value of Bitcoin has increased, more miners have begun participating in the network, driving up the electricity consumption of the network, thus in turn driving up the value of the coins, thus in turn driving up the difficulty on the network, and so on and so forth until we've reached this $50,000 ceiling that we're at today. Jaron Lanier, an individual that has been quite outspoken in social media and its impact on society, notes the following.
I've been advocating some kind of digital currency for a long time, and when when Bitcoin came out and the original paper on blockchain, my heart kind of sank because I thought, oh my God, we're applying all of this fancy thought and all these very careful distributed security measures to recreate the gold standard. Like, it's just so retro, it's so dysfunctional,
Yeah.
it's so useless from an economic point of view. So it's always and then the other thing is using computational inefficiency at a boundless scale as your form of security is a crime against the atmosphere. Obviously, a lot of people know that now, but we knew that at the start. Like, the thing is, when the first paper came out, I remember a lot of people saying, oh my God, this thing scales, it's a carbon disaster, you know?
Another downside to proof-of-work consensus that is worth noting is that due to the mining process, the network will always be intrinsically bottlenecked. The mining process takes time, and it will always take time for miners to guess the correct nonce to sign their particular block. This means that, under this model of consensus, it's very unlikely that Bitcoin would ever reach transaction speeds or volumes that are sufficient enough to replace existing methods of online financial transactions, as supported by PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, etc. So why not make changes to Bitcoin? This is unfortunately where a lot of different ideologies and philosophies about Bitcoin and its technology come into play. The Bitcoin network has undergone some changes in its history, and the protocol itself is hosted as a GitHub repository. One sub-repo of this repository is the Bitcoin Improvements and Proposals repo, where developers can submit changes and make pull requests for updates to the network. Miners can then signal or vote during the mining process as to whether they're in favor of particular updates or improvements being integrated into the master branch of Bitcoin. A recent example of this alteration with Bitcoin was the Taproot upgrade, which added multi-signature wallet capabilities as well as minor improvements to transaction management and some other features. However, other changes to the network have been much more controversial. A proposal from 2017 called SegWit 2x, or Segregated Witness 2x, was a proposal that did a number of things, but notably proposed to increase the Bitcoin block size, or the amount of transactions that could fit into a single block, from 1 megabyte to 2 megabyte. Businesses that were utilizing Bitcoin for their own commercial applications endorsed this proposal, but many in the Bitcoin network believed that such a substantial change to the network would be inadvisable for political reasons. A debate broke out amongst advocates for the change and defenders of Bitcoin's existing architecture, and this debate became known as the Great Block Size Debate. In the end, Bitcoin's block size was not increased and remains at 1 megabyte even today. Although there are many perspectives on why this proposal wasn't successful, even though it would appear to provide a net benefit to the usability of Bitcoin, one perspective, shared by Brad Mills, a podcaster and advocate for Bitcoin, suggested the following.
So there's two fundamental things here that Bitcoiners, our perspective was that we don't want to see Bitcoin be taken over or influenced by corporations in a way that's not in consensus with what the node runners and the developers of this network want. Because if we just give in to let corporations, because they've got all the money, set the rules of Bitcoin, what's that precedent setting for governments if they decide to turn against this thing? And we saw in 1933 with Executive Order 6102 when Franklin Roosevelt issued the ban on private ownership of gold, that's not off the table. So why make it easy for a government to just say, oh, well, Bitcoin's banned, and now we saw you changed Bitcoin in 2017 for these companies, so change it again for us, otherwise you're going to jail.
Right.
That was one of the core tenets of Bitcoin. Bitcoiners back then was like, it's decentralization is most important, and that has to be retained above everything else, even the price and adoption and everything.
Noting all of this, some proponents of Bitcoin and proof of work consensus have advocated for, rather than altering the chains themselves, miners to only use renewable energy in the mining process. We've seen some positive change over the years in the amount of fossil fuels being utilized in the production of Bitcoin. One recent event this year saw a number of Chinese mining teams and organizations relocate away from China, particularly relocating away from coal-driven energy grids in some areas, to places like Germany, where renewable and nuclear energy is much more available, thus driving down their own expenditures in the mining process. Some larger Western mining organizations like Hut 8 have also decided to work on building their own energy grids to facilitate mining on clean renewable energy that they control and harvest through solar and wind. However, as we all know, we still need resources to create renewable energy technology. Lithium, aluminium, zinc, and steel are all still required to be mined, refined, transported, and manufactured and delivered as end products to consumers in the form of solar panels, turbines, and batteries. Many argue that offsetting the energy consumption of a blockchain, which is by design exponentially inefficient through the utilization of these minerals and resources that we all require, is a less than ideal outcome, and that we already have enough challenges in front of us in arresting global climate change with our current industrial energy output before adding cryptocurrencies to the mix. But that's Bitcoin. So you might then assume that all cryptocurrencies and blockchain projects are similar to Bitcoin, or have similar functionality or similar objectives, but this simply isn't the case. There's a whole world of projects beyond digital money and Bitcoin, and it's a world that interests me far more than anything that I've talked about so far. It's a world that is utilizing blockchain technology to fundamentally alter the internet as we know it, and is also rapidly moving away from proof of work consensus mechanisms and the environmental consequences of this system. So let's now talk about Ethereum. Launched in 2014, Ethereum's objective was to create a distributed internet computer on the blockchain. Instead of nodes simply recording the state of transactions on a database, the Ethereum blockchain was designed to record the state of a single virtual machine and all of the events that had been executed upon this virtual machine. These updates to the machine's state would be executed in an object-oriented programming language called Solidity, which itself would execute snippets of code called smart contracts. Developers could then write web applications, which triggered smart contract events on the Ethereum network, and providing that that developer had authority over the digital asset that they were dealing with on the network, the virtual machine state could then be updated to reflect the new state that the smart contract had triggered. In practice, this allowed for developers to do a few different things, from creating what are called ERC20 tokens, or project-specific fungible tokens or coins that can be managed by an external developer, or they could also create unique one-of-one digital assets as ERC721 tokens, aka NFTs, which we'll speak about a little bit more in a moment. Additionally, thanks to smart contracts, users would be able to swap between these different asset types within a single transaction. And should they wish, developers could also create more advanced events that may require more than two parties to have authority over the transaction, or even timed events that have a built-in delay function. I'll go into a little bit more detail about some of these applications that are built on smart contracts and the internet computer idea briefly, but before I do, let's touch on Ethereum's energy consumption. Ethereum, like Bitcoin, currently uses proof of work as its consensus mechanism, and although it doesn't use a double-hashed SHA-256 cryptography mechanism, Vitalik Buterin, the author of the Ethereum white paper and founder of the Ethereum Foundation, which oversees Ethereum's development, has been vocally advocating for the proof of work consensus model to be discarded as early as 2018, and has been conducting his own research into alternative consensus models dating back as far as 2014. Partially because of the event processing inefficiencies and scaling limitations intrinsic to proof of work, but also partially due to the environmental impacts of proof of work that we've discussed already. Between 2018 and today, noting the potential that smart contracts provide, a number of developers have been creating their own blockchain protocols, experimenting with alternative consensus models as well as alternative programming languages for their smart contracts. One resulting development from some of this experimentation that's been occurring has been the proof-of-stake consensus model. Fundamentally, instead of independent parties participating in an energy-intensive guessing game where the penalty for misbehavior is the cost of electricity, on a proof-of-stake blockchain, anyone that is validating the network must volunteer a certain amount of capital, which could be destroyed or confiscated should they be found to have misbehaved and submitted an inaccurate or deliberately malicious block of information. This is called a stake of capital. Likewise, the event that determines whose version or sequence of history gets submitted as a valid block to the blockchain is quite different in a proof-of-stake system. Some protocols use pure randomness to pick a validator and have their history added to the blockchain. Others use some form of varied randomness, where they might prioritize the amount of capital staked or the length of time they've been validating on the network, or some other means entirely. Once selected, however, this validator is declared to be the chain's leader for a brief amount of time called an epoch, and once the epoch expires, a new leader is selected based on the rules of the net. Some epochs can last for brief minutes, others might last for hours. It depends on the network, the way it's configured, and what the goals of the network are. Because of this, the main advantage of a proof-of-stake blockchain is that any computational energy on the network can largely be devoted to driving a high volume of events with minimal delays on the network, and only a small amount of energy is required for the cryptographic signing process, essentially making the power consumption of a proof-of-stake blockchain much more similar to any typical web application that we might deal with, like Facebook, Google, Amazon, or other similar server-based system, but with the advantage of these events being recorded on a decentralized database. Thanks to the hard work and experimentation of teams behind projects like EOS, Polkadot, Terra, and many others, proof-of-stake consensus has now largely been proven as a viable alternative to proof-of-work, and many of these blockchains are currently providing internet computer services for decentralized applications and games. Thanks to the pioneering work of these teams and the hard work of the Ethereum Foundation, Ethereum has begun migrating its systems towards a proof-of-stake consensus model, and the migration is due to be completed before the end of 2022. This will leave only Bitcoin and a handful of other digital cash or digital gold projects as the remaining proof-of-work blockchains that exist in this space. Okay, so now that we've got our heads around the fundamental concepts behind Bitcoin, and we've got a little bit of an idea about smart contract platforms, what can you actually do with an internet computer protocol? So let's talk about NFTs. NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, serve as a counterpoint to fungible tokens like coins, Bitcoin, or Dogecoin. They're individual, unique assets that are created and stored on a blockchain, can still be exchanged peer-to-peer, still have a transaction history held on the blockchain ledger, but are unique one-of-one digital items or assets. Now, there's been a huge amount of investment speculation within several NFT projects that you may have heard about in the news or seen while browsing social media. CryptoPunks, the Bored Apes Yacht Club, and Hashmasks are just a few projects that have reached wild valuations. All of these NFT projects fall into a category of art NFTs called PFPs, or profile pictures, and generally use a palette of art layers or elements and a random seed value to generate or mint unique one-of-one artworks that are ownable as part of a collection or series. So why NFTs? What does an NFT provide? The concept of ownership within the world of art is fundamentally important, but it's something that has never really existed in a digital world. Certainly, artists have been able to engage with clients to create commissioned works or sell the rights to their work online, but these transactions are often quite complicated with differences in international law and tend to only facilitate usage of artworks within other commercial enterprises. NFTs help to align digital art with traditional art in that individual artworks can be sold by an artist and owned by the purchaser. Additionally, thanks to the blockchain and the way the blockchains maintain a token's history, NFTs are easy to authenticate, and anyone can track the history of an NFT through previous owners back to the initial wallet address that created the artwork. This also means that, again, similar to traditional art, NFTs can inherit provenance based on individuals that may have held the work or individuals that hold works from the same artist or in the same collection. But all of that, in my personal opinion, pales in comparison to NFTs' true unique selling point for artists. NFTs can have a built-in royalty mechanism. Yes, NFTs can have, encoded within the token's metadata, a function that directs a portion of any sales revenue back to the NFT's original creator. This means that, as long as the artwork stays relevant, an artist can receive a cut of any of the speculative value that a work may attain. But these are all just NFTs in the world of art, and while art is an obvious use case for NFTs, NFTs are just data on the blockchain. Data that is transferable with verifiable authenticity, historical transparency, and a royalty mechanism. And these attributes can be applied to a wide variety of items of value that we already exchange. Think about any real-world product that you've taken an interest in where authenticity has been important. Concert tickets, medication, Nike sneakers, a Louis Vuitton bag, a used car, maybe a house. These are all commercial applications of NFTs that are currently being investigated. And where an NFT might not replace a physical product, it can also serve as a certificate of digital authenticity that might sit alongside a physical item. In the strictly digital space though, NFTs are being used for IP licensing of music, as an access token for online services or platforms, for management of insurance contracts, medical histories, education records, international logistics, shares, and of course, digital items within games and CD keys for games. Now, why are these significant? We already sell items as IAP, why do we need to make them NFTs? It's my personal belief that when a player buys a virtual item as an in-app purchase within a game, it's thought of as a good by the player, and the purchasing decision is not thought of by the player as purchasing an unlocking service to support a developer. In fact, many players already perceive the rarity of IAP items as a significant component of their value, and many users may even intrinsically associate their digital identity with an in-game skin or a character build made unique through IAP. And so, should a player collect IAP cosmetics or permanent items within game, particularly those on a perpetual online game, it's not hard to see how the inability to sell items that are purchased, or dissolve them for some game, limits the user experience. Even if a player isn't able to redeem the full value of an NFT on the secondary market, being able to redeem it for some value is appropriate, I think, when discussing a digital good, and restores the traditional concept of trading in a game when the player is done. Although with NFTs, this also has the additional benefit of a studio being able to recoup a portion of the transaction through the aforementioned royalty mechanism, something that hasn't existed with Electronics Boutique and other brick-and-mortar game businesses. It's also worth noting how UGC NFTs could fit into this paradigm, perhaps even splitting revenue between the UGC NFT's creator and the developer of the platform. Perhaps this could also provide mod creators and avid community members compensation mechanisms for their labor, increasing the life of a project even after the development team might have moved on, or rejuvenating smaller gaming communities. Finally, as NFTs live as on-chain assets on decentralized networks, not only are they able to be owned and sold by users, but their existence is no longer directly tied to the operation of a game's single server. This is already facilitating some interesting exploration of cross-game transferable NFTs within the metaverse, and in future may also facilitate a number of other interesting use cases that we just haven't thought of yet. So now that we understand NFTs a little bit better, let's take this a step further and talk about some of the Internet of Value projects, or Web3 applications, decentralized applications, and a few play-to-earn games. dApps, or decentralized applications, are software applications that are built on top of the blockchain. They come in a huge range of forms and spread between traditional web applications and games that we're kind of used to all sorts of new financial tools in the world of DeFi, or decentralized finance. But here's a few really cool examples that I think illustrate how interesting this space is becoming. Theta is a decentralized video streaming platform that functions in a very similar way to Twitch and has a focus on gaming. It has support from Google, Samsung, and Sony, as well as G Fuel, and participants can upload and monetize videos, and network participants can assist the operation of the network by providing transcoding power or storage to the network, or generally just providing security services to the network. Next, Basic Attention Token is a decentralized advertising platform natively integrated into the Brave browser, an open source privacy-centered browser. Fundamentally, the aim is to disintermediate the advertising industry and allow advertisers to engage directly with a protocol that, in turn, matches ads to a user privately and locally within a browser, avoiding the use of cookies and commercial tracking software for targeting, whilst also providing inbuilt protections against ad fraud. And particularly relevant to our industry, Ultra.io is a decentralized game distribution platform that provides the ability for games to be owned and then resold in the form of NFTs. It currently states a 15% fee for hosting and distributing games and has partnerships with AMD, Ubisoft, Atari, and a number of other investment partners. To fund the development of some of these decentralized applications and games, many of these projects will utilize a token that represents a share or a stock investment within the cryptocurrency or blockchain project. A portion of these tokens are generally sold to fund initial development in a similar manner to a traditional stock offering round, with the development team retaining a large portion of tokens as a treasury to fund future development. In many cases, these tokens are then issued to the public via a mechanism called an initial coin offering, or ICO, which functions similarly to an IPO for a stock-traded business. However, I find it important to note that I can't find any examples of any token-issued projects that have registered as securities with the Securities and Exchange Commission within the US. As such, it appears that many of these projects don't currently have authorization to be issuing these digital securities under US securities law, and therefore are existing within a digital Wild West of investing. Regulatory clarity might come over time and assist a lot of these projects in getting off the ground with legal frameworks to operate within, but that hasn't happened to date. Unlike a stock or a share though, tokens are quite different in some ways. To incentivize users to participate in their communities or run proof-of-stake servers, which operate these projects and manage their tokens, many of these projects also feature mechanisms to issue new tokens to community members that are assisting the project in its growth. Some organizations may choose to run their project in a very central manner, whereby their tokens are only provided to community members for very explicit actions, and where the developer retains the majority of profits. We can consider this to be analogous to a typical startup business model, but with a slightly different software paradigm. But on the other end of the scale, some projects are experimenting with tokens as a method of creating experimental, community-owned, open-source projects, establishing the project and getting the ball rolling with a small founding team, but airdropping tokens to a wide variety of individuals, and through a token-driven voting mechanism called governance, allowing community contributors to set the future direction of a project and prosper from any appreciation in the project's value through token holdings. This type of organization is called a Decentralized Autonomous Organization, or DAO, and has currently only been recognized as a legal business entity in Wyoming, Tennessee, but provides a really interesting blend of open source software principles with a sort of capitalistic, socialistic blend of wealth creation. Under this model, token holders can submit proposals and pull requests to a repository, generate UGC, and contribute to a project in a number of other ways that add value, depending on the rule set established by the DAO. They can be compensated for their efforts directly through the issuance of tokens, or indirectly through raising the value of the network as a whole. Where this gets really interesting, in my opinion, is when it's applied to social media platforms or other, for want of a better term, let's call them web utilities. Instead of encouraging users and their friends to join a social media network and for their personal data to drive the profit model of the business operating the network, in the most open form of DAO, users can encourage other users to join a network that is community owned. And should they wish to give labor and work to a network, they can receive compensation for their efforts. It's a wild concept, I know, and it's frankly open to a lot of exploitation, and certainly it fits a lot of traditional definitions of a Ponzi scheme. But I think that we can all agree that the existing advertising-driven business model that powers a lot of social media platforms simply isn't serving the best interests of users. And although it comes with its own risks, perhaps this is an area for future exploration, and maybe we can see some good come of it. So now that I've talked to you through Bitcoin, I've talked to you through smart contract platforms, and we've discussed NFTs as well as some decentralized applications, I'm going to end on some games. This is a games talk after all. Like decentralized applications, blockchain games are distributed games that run atop the blockchain. Almost all of them utilize NFTs for their in-game items, and a lot of them also feature tokens which represent a share of the project's total value. Some may also additionally feature a virtual in-game currency, which for transparency and security reasons is generally also managed as a blockchain asset. So, some blockchain-based games that I think are worth paying attention to include Gods Unchained, which is a blockchain-based trading card game founded right here in Australia by Immutable. Axie Infinity, which is a Pokemon-like game where players can battle and breed a number of little monsters called Axies. Ori, which is an in-development project that blends element of trading card games and RPGs. And Star Atlas, which is a blockchain-driven MMO much like EVE Online. And beyond these titles, we have the world of the capital M Metaverse. The Metaverse builds on a number of concepts in the free-to-play and play-to-earn world, creating virtual universes that can be thought of as sort of successors to concepts like PlayStation Home, Habbo Hotel, and Second Life. Decentraland, a metaverse project that features numerous virtual communication hubs as well as multiplayer minigames. CryptoVoxels, a lightweight browser-based metaverse project where players can share coordinates in the world just like web links and operate their own virtual NFT stores, as well as design their own houses with imported assets or blocks. And Somnium Space, which not only appears to blend ideas from Decentraland, CryptoVoxels, and a number of other projects, but has also been natively developed for VR. I could spend an entire talk focusing on how these specific games and metaverse projects operate, but instead I'd like to encourage you to investigate these projects on your own time, assess why you believe these projects are garnering interest, and hypothesize about the future growth of this sector. So where do we go from here? As I stated at the outset of this talk, I believe that blockchain technology may likely be a catalyst for large changes within our industry and the internet more generally, the consequences of which we should all be trying to stay informed of. As such, I believe it's in our best interests as individuals and members of this industry to understand the changes that may occur from wider utilization of blockchain technologies, identify beneficial use cases, and advocate for the regulated utilization of or informed rejection of blockchain technology more generally. I understand if, even after this video, you remain unconvinced about blockchains, but I still hope that this video has served to be informative in some way and perhaps shown you something that you weren't aware of before. If, however, you now feel that you may be interested in learning more about this world, I'd encourage you to research a few key topics that I've only briefly touched upon today. These include Web 3.0 and the Internet of Value, decentralized applications or dApps, decentralized autonomous organizations or DAOs, on-chain and off-chain governance, and smart contract development platforms more generally, their pros, their cons, and what trade-offs have been made in the development of certain protocols that differentiate them from one another. For my part, I still feel rather uncomfortable in giving this talk and registering publicly my interest within this space. I recognize and agree with the energy consumption concerns around blockchain technology, and even though proof-of-stake blockchains may only use an equivalent amount of power to traditional web servers, I don't immediately feel comfortable giving the technology a writ large tick of approval. I also fear that this space is still rife with scams, issues of insider trading within specific projects, and an overall lack of regulation that leaves me concerned, particularly when I think about developing a business in this space. But I also see a glimmer of hope and potential in this world, maybe much in the same way as I imagine some developers saw the internet through the 90s. I can't foresee how this technology will evolve or how users might begin to understand and adopt this technology, but I do think on balance it's likely to be around for the foreseeable future, and I hope we can find positive ways to utilize this technology as we move forward. So thank you very much for listening. My name is Lo, again, they, them pronouns, and this has been How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Blockchain. Thank you again to the team behind GCAP 2021 for making these talks possible and for facilitating this talk. And I hope that we can all meet up again in person and chat together soon. Thanks so much. Goodbye.